Okay.
Recording has started. Yeah. Thank you.
So general status, just to recap, we now have milestones for the V0.90 standard, which we're trying to get done by end of month, which is still a challenge. And then a separate one for the V0.90 core spec or specification, which is all the material beyond what goes into the standard. We discussed that in the community meeting. And that, again, the focus on the standard, I think, Steve, you've clarified what's called normative information, essentially describing the data structure in my mind and the background for the Perl, but not all the how-to angles of it. Certainly have some reference to that, but not trying to be exhaustive about examples or details of how you do, how you create Perls, how you read Perls, and so on, and how you test them. So that's down to what are we? Okay. Well, so just to make people aware, if you go out on, there's a we have the G drive for Perl spec, and John's created some reports in Excel that well, they don't yet combine, but they will combine issues and PRs. And personally, I find that easier than the GitHub interface. So let me just post one of those quickly. Find where I am. So this is G drive. Just get come on, wake up, computer. It's not happy. Anyway, it's what we have at the moment is a total of 25 items, and 7 of those are pull requests and 18 are issues. So that's what's currently in the list of what we need to have the standard by the end of the month. And again, the purpose of this is to stabilize things with kind of lots of things in motion, so we can stabilize the basic idea of the standard and then work on the other parts, the core spec, again, what it means to create a Perl, parse a Perl, and so on. And of course, that may lead us back to changes to the standard or refinements to certain items. But that's the gist of the approach. Anyway, my standard, sorry, my it's frozen in my system. So there's John also posted the link to the project board, so that's got most of those items. And okay, something else. But there are not too many conceptual issues out there. So one of the main ones that's been a subject of long discussion is whether to merge namespace and name into a single component or keep the two. And if you go out there, you can find even Philippe has had been of two minds on this topic. So I've been pushing to get a decision. I don't have a super strong feeling myself, but I talked to Philippe with that some detail, and his take is that we should keep the namespace and the name, and that people who don't want to use namespace are obviously allowed. It's fine not to use it. So particularly looking at the Go Lang example, it seems to be the gist of that is to pack everything into the name and not treat anything as a namespace. And there's nothing in continue with namespace and name that prevents that from happening. It's just the nuance of what encoding occurs or doesn't occur. So we've sort of been stuck a little on what are we doing with those two components before we can make the decisions about how you actually deal with the, well, particularly the slash, right? The slash is the big issue there. So I don't know if any particular comments on that before we sort of firm that up and start updating those tickets. Or does anybody have a strong opinion against that approach, or is it that?
Against what approach? Combining?
Again, keeping name and namespace as separate. Namespace and name as separate components rather than merging them into one component called name.
I am in favor of keeping them separate for a lot of different reasons.
Okay. Just trying to see. I've read through all the things many times, and whenever you go to a ticket and you have to load more 2 times, that tells you there's a lot of discussion. But I'm just saying it's been spread out, and part of what John and I are trying to do is we're going to have to consolidate that and update some tickets with this reference point, which doesn't say the discussion dies, but that it is an important one because obviously if that were to change in a later version of the standard, then that's a breaking change.
Yeah.
So the idea is, if you don't want to use namespace, don't use it for a certain type, and name will accommodate what you want to do. And then we have to shift getting the details of exactly how that's encoded or not in the name segment. So, sorry, name component. I always get confused with the use of component here, but anyway. Okay, so I wanted to document that, and then John and I will go back and start updating tickets with that and get to the heart of the matter, because that's the key component discussion. And we still have items on subpath and qualifiers. I don't know if anyone wants to bring those up now or has a particular interest or comment on those.
What are the items on qualifiers?
There's we have tickets out there that is it sorted or not? That hasn't been finalized. Can I have the same can I have a duplicate qualifier? And I think we just have to make sort of rational decisions about those and move ahead. It's just, one of the problems we have is so much it's our own, I don't know who we are, but it's our own fault that the discussion has been going on for so long. There's so many threads, and we just have to sort of, the administrative work John and I will take on is applying decisions back to those and moving on. And there may be some new tickets just to get the last little bit, but those were the open items on qualifiers as far as I understand. Other comments on that?
Okay. I think the one set of comments we've received on the subpath PR, which currently focuses only on, as the other components do, defining the permitted characters. Piotr approved it. Still need another approval, and Philippe needs to eyeball that. But Piotr suggested 6 reserved characters, which, from my point of view, reopens the whole character encoding discussion in PR. We have time to make changes. No one's responded to Piotr's suggestion that we create 6 reserved characters in addition to the /.
Okay.
Sounds like that might be a lengthier discussion then.
Yeah, we're going to have to. So, there's a couple things to think about. I don't know. June 30th is not an absolutely magical date, but we're trying to set a date that gives us time to work on, some cycle of implementation testing in general, test suite, and also, some level of implementation testing. So we need to get there. I'm trying to get a couple focused half-day sessions with Philippe to sit down with him and have him finalize what he can, and then come out with a few of those. And I realize I didn't follow the protocol here exactly. We need to get the other agenda items from folks. Steve, do you have any agenda items for today?
Again, I think it's the same thing, just kind of knowing when I can actually start, even if I have to redo some of the work, just kind of knowing what that outline is going to look like for the core. So I can actually start the documentation process. Even if I have to redo some stuff, that's okay. I just want to get the outline kind of finalized. And then
the format doesn't matter to you, RST or MD for the working document? Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's okay, at least another point. Okay, great. Matt, do you?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I know that I mentioned in the past a couple of calls that we had about the website stuff.
Yeah.
I got 2 young developers who are chomping at the bit, who have nothing to do. So we need to give them advice ASAP before I lose them in 2 weeks.
Yikes. Okay. Yeah. So I did start work on that, Matt, and I didn't put it into a ticket yet, but I should be able. Today's a Perl day, so I should be able to put that in. It's mostly referencing the CycloneDX site, but talking about things that would be different for the layout, just because of where we are, being smaller and having different topics.
Yeah,
so that
it seems to have something like even 90% complete or whatever, you know, to pass on to them to just keep the
Right.
fire ember,
Yeah.
before the embers go out.
Right. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. Good point. Giannis, any agenda items? You're on mute. I don't know if you're just don't have anything. That's okay too.
I had one topic that came up potentially, but I'll leave it to the end in terms of someone was asking me about component evidence. If there's a way to relate things that are evidentiary the same artifact or same component or snippet, how can they be related via Perl? I don't know if that is a use case that's been considered yet or not. So I wanted to discuss that.
Okay. Well, yeah. So I'm not sure I understand the topic exactly. So
Yeah,
why don't you expand on that a little? Yeah.
How do we say, like the example that I used in discussion with the person yesterday in our CISO team was that log4j. Let's say that they have a container image that has 5 products on it, and all 5 use log4j, but 4 of them use it explicitly as properly with the proper package Perl reference. But the 5th one, we have scanners that say they renamed it or changed it slightly, but we know evidence that we scanned it and it's identical. We have evidence that it is log4j, but they've called it something different. How do we is there a way for us to relate that scenario via the Perl somehow?
So would that be because there's been the topic of discussion in our world, not directly related to Perl, but the classic example of that would be Uber jars. Is it something like that where the Uber jar mask,
Yeah, I mean that
presence
yes,
of log4j, but
yeah,
a scan will determine that you've got the class path and effectively.
yeah, it could be as simple as a rename, but it could go down to code snippets as well. So I know, like I talked about the copy where people copy C routines or C things out. So is there a way for us to say that this is the same base Perl? I'm just throwing junk out right now, but can we say it's the same base Perl, but have some addendum to it to say that it's a variant of some type? How do we record the variant basically?
Yeah, I don't think we've handled that too well. We had maybe a parallel situation. We were scanning some of our own projects and running SBOMs out of them, and there are a couple cases where we took a couple files from a PyPy project and modified that 1 or 2 files from that, and is that really a Perl, or what do you do with that? I don't think we came to a conclusion ourselves.
Right.
About the best way to handle that.
Right.
But it's not really the same thing. It's related to the same thing, right? I mean,
yeah,
they want to. It's not
They basically want to take the base identifier and add some extra distinguishing,
right.
name to it or something. Yeah.
Right. So what we experimented with that, and we didn't come to final conclusion, was, using a file, a qualifier for the file. That the Perl, it was this Perl plus this file, or possible or subpath. So that was the way we distinguished it. In the case we were talking about, it was PyPy, so there weren't that many files, so it was pretty simple. Had you thought about that approach, or?
Well, I think it would be. I would love to make sure that we have a formal, intently discuss the case somewhere at some point to give people guidance or advice on how to do these things, because
Okay.
I'm trying to tie this all things together, and I'm more excited about the transparency exchange APIs. So consistency is important for us if we treat these things as queries, and IDs are important to queries. So if the IDs, we can say if you're querying on all components that are derived from log4j, if there's a way to assure that the base, primary key or whatever is the same, but we can actually return all the variants basically as well.
Well, I think that fits in. Yeah, so that fits into how to do things stuff, and I think rather than the standard per se, Does that seem reasonable to you? It needs to be in the core spec, but not necessarily in the standard. It seems
Right.
pretty-
Yeah. Some type of some type of guidance, and it
Okay.
has to be thought,
Right.
thought through. And I think that that's the same advice. I think that we need to I need to figure out talk to Steve apart from this about, there was confusion generally about evidence as well, where our CISO team was trying to use evidence in an incorrect way as well.
When you have about evidence there, you're talking about the S-bomb or about the Pearl?
About the S-bomb,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah,
But
because
I'm
I don't
saying,
think we really have a.
it came down to a discussion about identities, that they really need
Right.
to, they wanted to create a derivative identity, basically.
Right. So you'd be looking for the S-bomb to have the Pearl with, again, potentially some qualifiers or subpath or something identifies that it's a subset of the, specific variant of log4j, but the evidentiary data would be in the S-bomb, not in the Pearl. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. I guess I'm sure, because I don't think we have a concept.
Yeah.
of evidence in Pearl.
100%, Michael.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And one of the concepts that I think we have to come up with some language, but we may want to explain even in standard, is that I look at it, there's kind of a left to right perspective on a Perl, that it gives you certain amounts of information. It tends to be more human on the left and more machine readable on the right. But people have questions. There's questions out there. It's like, well, can I have a Perl without a version? And obviously that's not going to be great for vulnerability checking unless you want a tsunami of data, but it still provides some level of information. So not good enough for an S-bomb, but just in general, trying to identify a piece of software, you go from general to specific. Left
and
to right.
when he and I were talking, he offered the log4j example, where I actually related to like a physical analogy, which is I'm building a house, and my bill of materials for my house requires a certain nail. But in the course of my house, I only want to describe the nail once, but perhaps I use 10,000 nails, and perhaps there's a reason for me that there's some batch or something that this nail is manufactured with a certain batch or something, and there's a quality control issue. So I might need to add some extra designations to it to further qualify its identity.
Right. So the more detailed, the more you expect to have a longer Perl, basically.
Yeah. Exactly. 100. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and there's a lot of discussion out there that is interesting about the human readable versus the machine readable. We're not, we're trying to balance the two. I've having looked at lots of Perls now, I've come to a point where I can easily recognize the escape or the encoding for the @ sign for an NPM namespace, and it used to bother me a lot. It's just irritating. But once you're used to it, the same thing with some of the encoding of slashes. For the humans, it just maybe we have to get used to that. It's still readable. It's just there's got to be a balance. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I can see. I mean, I just not to be morbid, but I was watching like SpaceX blow up, and thinking about they so like if SpaceX gets like, I don't know, let's make something up, like 1,000 heat tiles or something like that, or
Yeah.
and they're all the same model number, they're all the same component ID when it comes from them, but when they install it, they want to basically say, I installed this at location X or whatever on the surface of the spaceship, so if it fails, they can identify it, type of thing.
Yeah, that was an impressive video. It would fit an action movie. It was good not to be close to that. Yeah, wow. That was good. Okay. Well, I think we've got notes on that, and so we can add that in. So you come back to Steve's point. I don't have I haven't come up with a plan. I need to talk to Philippe too. I think at some point, much sooner than later, like before June 30, we need to figure out a way to restructure the documents that are currently out there against, of course, the pull requests are posted today, into a structure that looks like what we want, for the standard and for the core spec. So I haven't quite figured out how to attach that, but it's something we're going to have to do. And that again may mean that John and I have to do some work on rebasing things or something like that. But we've kind of gone a long time with this historical set of files, and they just don't quite fit where we're headed. So I think that, I don't know if anyone has any magical ideas, but I think that's just going to be some hard work, and we'll have to propose that in an issue concretely. But I think we've got to get to the target structure, as Steve's pointing out, rather than the current structure. Because again, for example, the specification RST has the how-to and other things in there that we want to have separate. And it should, I'm trying to yawn a little bit here, but if we have it a little bit more granular and better structured, that should make the PRs easier to handle, because now we have a lot that span all kinds of places. So I think that would be an improvement. Okay. I'm sorry, earlier, Giannis, I got you and Matt confused on the agenda. Did you have anything to bring up that you wanted to?
No, I have no items.
Okay.
Thank you.
Michael, I have one quick question about what you just mentioned. Is if anyone has any suggestions on the optimal format for these documents that we're going to create with the desired structure, stick with RST, GDocs. If it makes any sense to change the current format from RST now, we can easily do that. Or we could do that later as well.
Well, I think we've settled on RST or Markdown. I don't think we're going to go the GDoc route, right?
I'm just
isn't that the easiest for you, Steve?
Yeah, I just need to copy and paste. I don't care what the source is.
Okay, so GDoc would work for you too?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm not suggesting we change from RSTs.
Yeah, there's no change request, but then we can't control the change requests. Yeah, so
right. So whatever you guys think are more is the most efficient way to do it.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Okay. Okay. I think it's RST or MD, John, from a change control perspective. Yeah, as much as the GDocs are good. Thanks. Okay. So the topic I wanted to bring back to that I think is open is the Perl type schema. And there have been some discussion. Philippe threw in the idea of using YAML instead, which personally I've tried to discourage. I think we need to go there. And I think you've commented on, Steve, but my sense is the tooling that's available already for processing on the Ecma side are pretty much based on JSON files, and the techniques you've got for converting the information in the JSON file into like web pages, that's all based on JSON, right? So I don't know, and I'm not sure what YAML brings to the table.
Yeah, it's all JSON. From a security perspective, and even for just a completeness perspective, YAML doesn't require the end of file terminator. It's optional. So you honestly don't know if something was cut off in transmission or if it's actually the end.
Oh, right. That was Philippe's point about the problem with JSON being the string versus the lines, right? That was his. Yeah.
Yeah. So JSON is obviously, for example, if you didn't get a complete JSON blob, right?
Okay.
Because it's not going to be valid, etc. And that's very easy to prove. Versus YAML, it's not as easy to prove.
Okay. Well, I'll pursue for next week to be sure that I get an answer from Philippe, but I think we'll proceed with the JSON. We just don't need to be innovating in all these areas. We use YAML for other things. It's got its own qualities, but the JSON schema is pretty, in particular, the JSON schema approach is pretty tried and tested, and I don't think we don't need to be innovative in that area. We need to be innovative in our content. So on the Perl type side, Steve has an issue, which, John, I think you posted that in did you post the Perl? I'm sorry, where am I here?
In the project view?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. There are just two that say in progress, and that's a line numbered 12 with the issue 310, and then.
Okay, well, could you post I'm sorry, I'm not doing great here, but here could you post the just the specific issue and the specific PR in the chat while we're talking? Oh, okay, there's one. There's the pull request, and then also the issue. So I think it hasn't been, what Steve put together made sense. What I've noticed is there hasn't been a whole lot of commentary. Matt made a lot of comments. Again, I need Philippe's review. I don't know if the lack of comments is because we haven't really talked about it and people haven't been thinking about it or not. So first thing I'd encourage you and anyone else you're talking about Perl to make comments now, so we can get this going. I think a couple concepts that I'd like to get feedback on at the top. So one is throughout the current materials, we frequently use this phrase known Perls, which I think is extremely vague and not going to work, because who knows, right? Who is knowing these things? And the concept here behind the Perl type schema is that there'll be some some form of registration or something like that. I put in my comment on that area that we probably should use the word registered. It seems reasonably neutral. It's not saying approved. You could say approved, but that gets a little more. I'm not sure the word is. I think the word it's more like a value judgment. So, for instance, for some of us, our perception is that SPDX on their license list got a bit too involved in approving, meaning putting things on the list they liked and not putting things on the list they don't like source available licenses and so on. And our purpose here is I believe for people to say, I am using, or I have an idea, or I want to document a Perl type. And what we're trying to do is make it available to humans and machines to read that, so that if there is such a thing, that everybody has a basic definition of it, whether it's a very small population of packages that use that or large, it's a form of registration. And that there'll be a process where, as I envision it, correct me here if I'm wrong, Steve, but that basically once we get a system in place, you'll have a pull request. We'll create some template, a template they can fill out, and that'll have to go through some approval process. We don't know who the committers are for that, but essentially, we don't want to have to convene weekly meetings of committees and such, right? There needs to be some process like, the process we're in right now to deal with contentious questions, but that in general, it'll be you'll put in a pull request and knowledgeable people will look at it and either approve the pull request, then it becomes a registered Perl type, or there's some discussion which goes on until it's resolved. Am I missing something? Is that on target?
No, I'm a big fan of the word registered as well. That's what we use for the CycloneDX property taxonomy as well. I think people know it. I think people know what it is, and the word registered does not imply any kind of approval or any kind of favoritism. It's just they're all kind of the same.
Okay. Other thoughts on that? I'm in favor of that too. So that'll be logic. Okay. Well, so we'll start writing up that way. I mean, then there needs to be a governance process, and I think it's less about the mechanics. Again, the question is, who are the committers who make those decisions? And then secondly, some guidance about some principles, right? So there's lots of discussion about, can you have multiple Perl types for sort of the same thing? And that's the Golang discussion. This seems to be the prominent one. And then there's other discussions like what's a Perl type. So I was reading an issue, I think, yesterday about someone asking about having a Perl type for a DLL, and the response in the ticket, I can't remember who responded, was, well, DLL is a file, not a package. The package is a nugget. But that all seems to fit into the how-to and so on. And we'll just have to have some, again, not as much official, but sort of secondary material describing the principles behind it. And I don't know, it's not going to make everyone happy, but we're not a scientific body. We're not a government agency that's, granting funding or removing funding based on what you do, right? So I think we're going to have to trust to a certain amount on the good faith of people trying to do this. And in general, if people can submit a well-formed pull request, that probably the bias should be toward having the Perl type registered. A much broader issue that I think gets to Perl governance that we really haven't spent enough time on is, if there's a package manager or a community, again, like Go, where there's a couple different approaches, how do we draw in, I don't know what the right word is, not official, but leading members of that package community to come to decisions, because none of us are the exact experts on each one. And I don't have an answer to that, but I think it's kind of important. So I've previously mentioned, I think it's somewhat analogous to the industry working group for CycloneDX, but in this case, there are large package communities. There's going to be a lot of different viewpoints, but we have to figure out some way to reach out to those people. I think Philippe has previously mentioned and I'll bring it up again that about code. Just to let people understand, at the moment there's a nonprofit based in Belgium, of which Philippe is the principal, called About Code Europe, and it's a Europe specific nonprofit. So it's only allowed to get grants and do various things in Europe. And so that's what we mean when we say About Code today. We're also in the process of hopefully standing up an About Code Foundation out of Brussels. That would be an international foundation like Linux Foundation or Eclipse, obviously much smaller and much different in spirit, but that would be the natural successor. So when I say About Code right now, I mean About Code Europe. And so About Code Europe has received a very significant grant, a donation from a major company and a grant from the STF to work on Perl. And so we're compensating people who are doing the day-to-day work on that, a lot of whom are, the About Code characters, but we could bring in others. Anyway, non-trivial amount of that funding is for outreach to the package communities, and specifically to help them, to work with them and help them upgrade the existing tools or create new tools and so on. So, that's a specific project with specific milestones and whatever that About Code Europe has to deliver to get the funding from, to get the actual money out of software tech fund. But it includes a lot of the work is that outreach and actual concrete improvements to the various tools. So that's kind of the background here, and it doesn't specifically reference governance, but I think maybe we'll need to have a session on that. That's just trying to so we can outline that governance approach. Well, the outreach within the governance. Obviously, the governance is more central to the Perl spec and the Perl project itself, and this is how to bring in the other parties. But I think we're okay then on registered. I'll make a few more comments on that. Any other thoughts on how this should work? I think Steve's outlined the schema, but anything we should be thinking about beyond a pull request as a way for someone to activate a Perl type? So. Yeah.
Well, when it comes to the website, I think we should have a number of ways that folks can actually participate, and submitting a proposal for a new Perl type should be one of them. Right now, we're reaching technical users by using GitHub, but there are, not necessarily package ecosystems, but there are ecosystems that exist. The ServiceNow store being one of them, where, for us as an employee of ServiceNow, I was aware of some internal internal need to have, officially supported Perl type for that. But in reality, those needs actually came from non-technical users. So
Okay.
it would be really beneficial, in my opinion, to provide a way for the non-technical users to engage a little bit more.
And would that would a more general issue posting be sufficient, or is that too technical for that group? Just be able to state it in a narrative way in an issue versus doing a pull request. Is that a sufficient answer to that?
They would have to still have an account, which is also
GitHub account. Okay. Yeah.
barrier to entry. So
Okay.
I don't know. I think maybe the community can kind of think about that.
Okay.
A little bit.
Yeah. Well, we could have a a template email or something like that, right? That people could submit. No, I think that makes sense. It's there's no. I don't know that the more pearls the better, but there's definitely no limit on it, right? Because they're going to vary hugely in how big the community they cover is.
Yeah.
I don't know. I tend to like the word use community versus ecosystem, because ecosystems are a different thing, but yeah, we can still talk about that. Okay, so that's a good point. We need a really low friction way that someone can raise that, but ultimately they would have to find someone, but it could be someone from even, this Perl core team who helps them guide them through how to request that thing.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so that I think we can move ahead on that. we need Philippe's attention to, there were discussions about regex and case sensitive and other sorts of things, and we need more input on those things. But I think this is pretty central.
I do want to just make a note that when we review the Perl type schema, so the index, there's two schemas.
Right.
One for the index, which is basically just imagine a tool going out to an index and automatically knowing like all the different Perl types. That's the use case.
Right.
Then there's a schema for the actual Perl type itself. What I did is try to, in a machine readable way, capture all of the ways that the existing Perl types have been specified. And some of the ways I don't necessarily agree with, but I wanted a one-to-one way to capture that in a machine readable way.
Mm-hmm.
So case sensitivity and stuff like that, and the allowed characters, yeah, lots of, I think, most, I don't think most ecosystems actually do that, but there's some that do.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to, beyond just the types, I think we need to figure out, like, when you register a type, what is actually going to be permitted as part of that registration? Because that's going to directly feed the schema. Do we want case sensitivity as part of that? Do we, and not just one, when somebody registers a new Perl type, would it be then required for that individual to specify, case sensitivity or the allowed characters or the disallowed characters or these types of things? Do we want that level of that high bar or not? Because that is a pretty high
also,
bar.
yeah. So I mean, the argument for more of it is to use the schema as a major input to automation, right? Presumably the more you have. Another approach I think has been discussed is, and not sure whether it's mandatory, but if you want that higher level of specificity, should that be expressed in a test suite?
Mm-hmm.
That, so that, rather than trying to write it out in words, which we have to do for the standard and other places, but is saying, the quality of people recognizing and working with your Perl types will be improved if you provide these test items, which are not, again, the concept of the testing and the principles can be part of the standard. We're not making a specific test suite part of the standard. Does that approach?
As long as the test suites, again, because we don't want, I think what I would love to get away from are all of the case statements or if then else statements where we're handling normalization on a Perl type basis, and it just leads to a lot of really ugly code. If we can have a way for a Perl library to not have any, predetermined rules on how to handle a Perl type, and also then be able to pass the test, that to me is kind of an ideal state.
I guess you can conceive of, sort of a baseline test and a more advanced test, right? That you pass a test of just basic Searle syntax, and another one that leads to the automation, which is a more advanced approach, right? Or something like that.
Well, I mean, no, I mean, even the tests that are specific to a Perl type, the tool, which doesn't have any predetermined knowledge of that type, should automatically be able to pass the test for that Perl type using the definition.
Okay. Well, obviously, yeah. So obviously a fair amount of work. I think, there are other examples of things like about what would include in the schemas, like is there something like a list? It's come up at some point, list of recommended qualifiers, right? That's and obviously there are many package or communities here that do have a very useful and logical list of recommended qualifiers. Does that mean you can't have other qualifiers? I don't think that's the case. So I guess, yeah, so we need some attention to the Perl type. So I'm going to suggest, we're not doing sprints or anything, but that's going to be a major focus of, getting Philippe's input, but other people's input.
Question,
John?
Steve, so will the type specific schemas then, it sounds like they'll be pretty directly related to the validation process.
Yeah.
So that any language specific implementation will, in following the schema, properly be able to accurately validate an input string.
Right. It would greatly simplify the implementation of all the Perl libraries, and it would likely lead to more ecosystems actually supporting the Perl spec.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, cool.
And a related question is whether currently the Perl type work is under the Perl spec. One thought to come up is, should we have, as we move forward, should we have a separate repo for whatever we're doing with the Perl types be under the Perl spec repo, or should there be a Perl types repo just to simplify life again, if that's all you're doing is keeping to the current spec and just implementing that, then it might be easier to manage in its own repo in terms of permissions and just traffic. I don't know if anyone's thought about that.
I think from an administrative perspective, it's probably up to you guys. I can see pros and cons of doing it both ways. If you keep it separate, it's going to be a ton of administrative to kind of go through all the tickets and move all the stuff that's Perl types into their own repository. At the same time, it's going to tremendously clean up the Perl spec repo, which will be nice.
Which is what I'm thinking of. Yeah. So this would again only be requests about storing the types and the type data, not about conceptual issues that would affect the standard per se and so on.
Right.
And with the project capability, we can do the we can reference issues and pull requests across repos. So
right.
I think it would.
So that's up to you guys. I don't have a strong opinion.
Well, yeah, I think we want to stack up some of these administrative things. And again, John does most of the work and I try to help out, but I think, a cleanup is in order one way or another. So we may as well take it on and pull out the Band-Aid, as it were, because, there's been a lot of accumulation of stuff. And I don't know, in general, I think, again, in homage to Jan, a bit of the granularity makes some things easier, right? To really be able to separate them so people don't have to, if all they want to do is get a new Perl type, then everything is in one place for that. And it may or may not be the same committers. Okay. So that was my main point. Those are the main points about Perl types, getting the attention to them. So I think we're solidified on using JSON schema, and we need to, I think that's probably the biggest open item, not because there's huge conceptual questions, but because it just hasn't received the same attention as the other PRs. So we're still, again, John and I are still trying to, get Philippe's input and get down, this, relatively small number of issues and PRs that need to get, through the cycle, again, with the idea that between June 30 and September 1st, we can have new issues and PRs that are related, but there's so many moving parts. So, again, in the example of the pull request you did, Steve, for this, I appreciate how thorough it was, but I couldn't make sense of it by looking at all the files, the 14 files that are changed. I looked at the 2 files that were interesting, right? The index and the schema, and that's where I put all my attention. And then obviously that, as you found out, they affect all kinds of other things, but I'm working from the point of view, let's get the index and the Perl type schema solidified, and then we can go figure out the ramifications for all this other documentation.
Yeah, what I had done is there's the Perl type, there's the index, as you mentioned, and then I provided some examples of what a completed Perl type could theoretically look like.
Mm-hmm.
And I provided ones for Maven, NPM, and the SWID Perl type.
Right.
And then I also included a script that automatically generates the human readable Perl type markdown. Now we can change the RST, it doesn't really matter. but
Yeah.
I just did Markdown because it was easy. But the script that then looks at the JSON and then automatically generates the human readable stuff. So if you're visiting the website, you'll actually be able to read about the Maven Perl type rather than having to fumble through a bunch of JSON.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. And you know, we've actually been using those in review. When I said they were secondary, part of it was the generation and so on. So
Yeah.
that, yeah, obviously the examples make sense. And you know, we want all that capability to go from the JSON to something that's human readable, not do anything by hand. And that's
Yeah.
very,
One
very
thing
useful.
that's certainly up for debate is there's pros and cons of doing it either way, but I chose JSON schema draft 7, which is a couple versions behind. And I did that because the majority of tools support JSON 7 and even default to draft 7. And there are some tools that don't support some of the newer drafts. I think the latest, I think, is 2020-12, I think.
So they changed their versioning. Is that
Yeah,
they went to Calver sort of thing, or?
yeah, so they went from draft 7 to there's a 2019 draft, there's a 2020 draft, and to my understanding, the JSON schema folks are also joining Ecma, so it will eventually be an Ecma thing, to my understanding. So we'll actually have eventually an actual released version of JSON schema as a standard, which will be amazing after so long. But I chose draft 7 not because it was the latest, but because it was the most supported.
Okay. Yeah.
So just FYI to everyone.
Okay. Well, we'll catch that in the notes. I don't have an informed opinion on that. I guess I'm surprised it goes for so many. I thought it was under IETF, or no? Is it there's?
Yeah, that effort kind of failed. But yeah.
Okay. And the documentation that seems to be, but I was wondering because it didn't really say anything about this formal standard. It just said IETF here and there. So it's is that a sure thing that's going to Ecma or a plan?
At this point, I've heard through decent authority that the JSON schema team is strongly considering a move to Ecma. I have not seen the formation of the actual technical committee at this point, but I'll let the group know once once that happens. I'll also reach out to my folks at Ecma and see where we are in that process. I do know that one of the, as you can imagine, when you create a standard, you have to get sign-offs on all the patent-related issues, right? And for CycloneDX, that meant that we had to define what a material contribution actually was and go out to every single contributor who had material contributions. JSON schema has been around for a really long time. So it's likely a fair amount of work for that team to kind of do that.
Wow. Okay. I never thought about that. Well, I think, yeah, it's good that we document that. I would hope, again, maybe I don't get your input, but I would hope that we're not like stretching the boundaries or we're probably using a fairly basic subset of the schema for what we're doing, I would imagine. Yeah. So hopefully that would mean that the incremental changes for a later version would not affect us as much as someone who has a much more elaborate schema.
Yeah.
Right. Would be my guess. Okay. Well, I think that makes sense. So, so we'll put focus on that and try and flesh it out. Again, I don't think there are huge controversial points, but we need to get something out there, and then actually that will be obvious. Should be an obvious focal point of testing between June and September relative to the standard, and between in July and August, and then also again just for the core spec, which we have until December. Again, I'll repeat, but this is fuzzy, but trying to work on an outreach plan, and based on these timelines, it seems that as far as an outreach effort of don't plan press releases per se, but I guess that's okay. But it would be January of 2026, because December is a dead month in business, I think, around the world, and not just US. And so launching things in December kind of is the tree falling in the forest with nobody about. So we need to ramp up some activities, low key, but ramp up activities for January to make the announcement of, both the standard and the core spec around it. So I think that I don't have any, we're not waiting on that to work on a website or other infrastructure, but that would be sort of when there's a push to get the word out. And I don't know much else about it, but anyone who's interested in that, we could form an outreach team. I guess, outreach is the proper word. It's not business development. It's not marketing per se. It's outreach to the various communities. And also just sort of, putting the stake in the ground with the version 1.0 standard and specification for those who've been active at various times, may have been a little dormant for various reasons, maybe because they're waiting for something from the spec, or maybe because they're just been dormant, and then we can revive that activity. And again, as I mentioned, there's funding. There is funding for that. So if people be interested in contributing, we can probably, in a maintainer mode, have some compensation for people who can work on that through About Code as contractors to About Code Europe. That's the funding mechanism we have with the STF. So okay. We're coming to the top of the hour. Anything else we should be discussing? Any other concerns or comments?
I went through the list of issues that John had posted on the course Perl spec. One thing that we might want to figure out for the standard itself are what are the reserved qualifiers? What are the qualifiers that are applicable to all Perl types? Because that will have to be in the standard, and there have been a number of requests to add additional Perl type or Perl qualifiers. Architecture was one of them, and there's been a few others. I can't recall what they are offhand.
So you think this? So we should have in the spec some list of registered, I guess would be the word here, qualifiers, as opposed to people can still add qualifiers that, it doesn't necessarily make a Perl invalid if they've added a qualifier. Just people won't necessarily know what to do with it unless there's guidance from the authors of that type, right?
Right. I think the reserved qualifiers need to be in the spec, in the standard.
Okay. I'm sorry. And so the word we should use is reserved. That's fine. I think that makes sense.
Right.
Okay.
But I think we need to discuss like which ones we're going to make applicable to all Perl types.
Right. So, well, the point being, if you use that qualifier, then it means this thing everywhere. If you use a qualifier that's your own, like, the epoch type of stuff or whatever, then that's specific to a Perl type because that's where they use it. Okay, well, that's probably a good list. Do you know, John, off the top, whether that's in the issue that's out there, or do we need a new issue to cover that?
The question of there's a qualifier.
Reserved qualifiers, yeah, just specifically that there's a reserved set.
I'm sure there are issues that talk about it, and there's a section toward the bottom of the Perl specification.rst, and
Okay.
it's, I don't know who's paid attention to it in the recent years, but nobody probably, and yeah.
Okay, we'll go back through that, Steve, and I think it makes sense to create a new issue if we don't have one that specifically talks to that, because that is an important question.
I would imagine we also would want qualifier keys that individual types have defined to be unique in the broad system. Otherwise, it's going to mean one thing in Cargo and another thing in Python. I don't know if that's important or not, but so it occurs to me.
Right. So that would be, so here we would have a reserved issue, which is at the standard level, and we'd have potentially a register type issue as saying, you want to register a new qualifier. This is what it's supposed to mean. I don't have it. I'm not sure I understand that. I don't know.
I don't know if it's important. If it's not important, then we shouldn't bother with it.
Well, we should have the discussion, and it's all these things, and we want to have an audit trail of what we discussed and why we made a decision, right? So that, again, using other standards like again, my the scars from the SPDX experience, people come in later and say, oh, well, I have this brand new idea and we should do this. And whether you like the decision was made or not, it's not a brand new idea. It's just this person is new. And we had to get better there at documenting why decisions were made and when they were, and just point that person there. It doesn't mean you can't be reopened, but it's not a new idea. It's just, it's new to you is kind of what you get, which is fine, right? Because you want more people to participate, and the more people participate, many of them are going to, well, by definition, if they're new, they're not going to know the history unless you can. Yeah. Okay. So we'll look for that, John, for the reserved qualifiers. And I think, I guess we'll want to put some of that terminology in the spec, in the standard itself, right? What we mean by reserve, what we mean by
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's to be clear. Okay. Great. Okay. So Matt, I'm having a Perl day today, so I'll get, what I was going to do is just I created a repo for the short-term release called community under Perl spec, and I'll just put an issue in there with the information. It's probably the easiest way to get at it. Does that make sense for you?
Oh yeah, that's perfect. Thanks.
Yeah. And another day, I put a proposal out there. I think we need a mailing list to do outbound communication, because right now it's pretty much people are already in the know. So I'll put a proposal in there. So I don't know whether we'll keep community as a long-term repo. It's just out there at the moment to track certain things that are more organizational or administrative than technical.
Yeah. So if you just DM me the link to the issue, and that'd be perfect. So thanks.
Okay. Happy to do that. Great. Okay. Well, clock on the wall since 8:02, so I think we're good, and I'll get on the rest of our day. Great. Thank you so much, John. I think we can close things out, and I think we're a good meeting. Great.
All right.
Have a nice weekend.
Cheers.
You too.
You too.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.